Let's go. Let's go.
All right, let's kick this off. So, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Super excited to be back for another webinar roundtable discussion with integrated projects. We've got a really special, tasty treat for you today. We're going to focus on actually a new development. Hold on, let me mute this here. Yeah, we've got a new development for you this week. So we at Integrated Projects are conducting an industry-wide report on all things reality capture, as-built challenges, verified conditions, and we're looking to really become a kind of an underrepresented voice, I think, in the industry, where we can take the opinions and the experience of architects, engineers, designers, construction managers, owners, operators, and really just get a temperature check as far as where we are in the industry. So this is an initiative that we're going to be running for some time, and we've already actually launched the survey live, and we have some respondents so far. So we'll kind of do a bit of a dive on that during this presentation. But we have a live link to the survey that we would really love the opportunity for everybody to jump in. It shouldn't take too long. I think I filled it out in less than 10 minutes. It's about 22 questions or so. And these are, ranging from all things about, just qualifying questions to as-built procurement questions, return on investment questions, things like that. So we're gonna take a dive into why are we even doing this in the first place? The industry-wide problem that we think needs a voice. And then we'll give you some instructions on the invitation to participate in the survey. I believe we've already dropped a link to Mentimeter. It's an anonymous survey, so feel free to jump in there. Go ahead and start filling it out. We also, on the bottom left corner, we've got a QR code here. If it's easier to do on your phone, you can participate that way. We'll give a little bit of a, while everybody's filling out this survey, we'll give a little bit of a IPX intro, and then we'll really get into a discussion topic. And we want to make this conversational. So I'm super excited because we brought three members of our team, but hopefully a good amount of industry participants as well. So please feel free, if you come up with really interesting answers and you want to post them into the comments. If you have any ideas on maybe questions that we should be asking that we're not, we will be developing this survey to get as kind of comprehensive around this subject as we can. We'll do a little bit of a questions and answers. Again, we'll keep it open format, and then we'll wrap it up from there. So what are some of the advantages of doing this? Well, we have actually we want to publish this industry-wide report on as-built challenges to the greater industry. So basically everybody that has participated is going to be able to claim early access to this report that we're putting together. And if that isn't enough, we also have a 20% BIMIT discount coupon, which is up to like a $4,000 value that, just by filling out the survey or inviting a peer to complete the survey, booking a meeting with one of us will run through basically how to redeem the coupon and get the best value, how to place an order, all of that sort of stuff through BIMIT. And we'll post a link here to the chat on that for that calendar invite. And first off, a little bit of housekeeping. So my name is Tyler Putnam. I'm head of solutions here at Integrated Projects. Super excited about this topic and a lot of the other topics that we've been rolling out with these webinars recently. My background is in architecture. I'm actually licensed here in New York, and my entire career really has been about solving the problems of the intersection between architecture and technology consulting for companies like SOM, Ramza, other corporate architecture and construction firms. And I'll kick it over to George to introduce himself.
Hey everyone, I'm George, and I'm head of product here at Integrated Projects. My background is also in architecture and landscape architecture, but most of my career has been in tech, working basically trying to solve really hard problems around representing spaces, things you can't see, places you can't travel to, and that brings me here. And yeah, Jose.
Awesome. Thanks, George. I have the incredible privilege of working with George and Tyler, along with some of the brightest folks in the industry. My name is Jose. Worked with my parents at a pizza shop. To get out of the pizza business, I learned a little bit of design, and so found myself working as an architect. At a certain point in time, crossed over with Tyler, who have an incredible firm in New York City at Ramza. To pay the bills, I moved to the other side of the table as a construction manager. So I was on the receiving end of design drawings. And amidst that whole career evolution, one of the things that kept me up at night was just really bad existing conditions information. So whether I was a designer or as a builder, I was often designing with just inaccurate or out of date information. So for the last 7 years, what's kept me kind of up at night is really beginning to solve for this problem. And so we actually recently put out a question, and it was telling. Amidst all the talk of 3D and 2D and BIM and evolving as an industry, turns out that when designers, developers start a project, PDF drawings are still the king of documentation. But here's the rub. So if PDFs are the primary source of information, when you double click into this information, landlords, designers, builders often tell you something like this, where they're about to start a project and it turns out that the best documentation they have available is actually from 1984. And it's a series of impartial Xeroxed plans that were either rolled up or in someone's folder drives. And that's what they have to kick off a project. Someone like a Joe Zink, who's both an advocate of us as well as a customer, his development team acquires campuses, often decades old, and he faces the same exact problem every single time he starts a project, which is in order to get everybody speaking the same language and kicked off on the right foot, getting accurate information, getting existing conditions is often kind of priority number one. The challenge, however, is that the same challenge that Joe faces is the same challenge that we've surfaced up in our own experience. So as IPX, we are busy digitizing a ton of buildings across a bunch of different sectors, offices, residential, industrial. And we've uncovered that not only is Joe correct, but it's actually uncovered what we think to be really a plague across the industry, which is turns out 8 out of 10 buildings actually have inaccurate or out of date information every single time. Whether a landlord is looking to acquire that building and the documentation that they receive is really what they have to base their decisions on acquiring due diligence, or that same documentation being passed over to the design, engineering, construction teams to base it off further renovations. So we think that this is a pretty big problem, and we'd like to get to the bottom of it. So I think the purpose of this webinar was just, we hope that this is kind of the first of several sessions. And if you're listening into this, we'd like to think of you guys as early advocates. We need some help. And so George, Tyler, myself, the team, we're committed to getting to the bottom of it. And the way that we're looking to do this is really just to ask basic questions about just, what are the leading developers, architects, and builders doing? And so one of the things that we set out to do is that we want to make a commitment to ourselves to kind of get a diverse set of inputs from architects. For now, the survey is US centric, but we do intend to kind of expand this. But just to kind of get a state of the industry, right? Like, how are we starting projects? How are we starting renovation projects? How are we acquiring buildings? And what do we start with? In fact, if we're still stuck in PDFs, then it suggests that the industry's got some room to grow. So what we've done, and I think for if you haven't already, this is kind of the format that we're using to kind of gather up responses. So if you're watching this, I encourage you to take out your phone, scan the QR code. We also have a link that I think on the next slide I'm going to share, but it's going to take about 5-6 minutes, depending on how fast you are, maybe 10 if you're even more exhaustive. But my hope here is that you actually, as you fill this out, you will see real-time feedback on what others are responding to. This is kind of the first and second wave of responses. So we do anticipate that we'll have more sessions for this. As you fill this out, I do encourage you guys, when you finish, please, please, please identify one peer, whether at your own firm or just a colleague in the industry, to share this. Our goal here is that as we get more insight, we do intend to share this report. For those that have completed and obviously shared extended invite, we do want to extend an early access. So if you haven't already, I'll give you a few moments to scan the QR code. I'm going to pass the baton over to George, because even at this point, we actually started to surface up some real-time insights already. Now, it's not exhaustive, and we intend to continue to grow this, but it's already telling in terms of just some of this is instinctual, some of this is actually quite surprising. But yeah, I'll let George kind of dive into it. And I'm sure as you guys are listening in, filling out the survey, you guys are probably going to start to kind of relate to some of the things George is uncovering here.
Thanks, Jose. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that some of what we'll go over is intuitive to many of the folks. I think to maybe to level set or to start, if you've been watching some of our previous conversations, there's a couple themes that you'll probably see come up also in as answers that people have been providing us, and I think for us, what we're trying to draw through these questions is a series of next steps in some way about how to address the challenges that we're facing, because the status quo in some sense is just not good. It's just not, like, something needs to change. And I think by hopefully highlighting some of the challenges that everyone's voicing, we can come together and figure out steps forward. And I think this is one of those things that, like our previous conversations on some of the templates that we've released, right? For those that might not be aware, like a couple weeks back, we released a RFP template, and maybe we'll share that also, the link to that, in this chat as well. But I think what we're just starting to realize is a lot of these things are just very recurring, and without any real action taken collectively, it will just persist. And so I think to start off, the first question we only sampled a couple of them here and there, but the first one is actually very, very intuitive, and actually more surprising that there was even a group of people that it wasn't 100% was fascinating. So this question was, how often have you encountered late stage rework due to outdated or inaccurate existing conditions data? And maybe not surprisingly for some of you watching, over 80% of the respondents claimed that from occasionally it happens all the way to on most projects. And even if we were to think about the occasional number, I think that it's one of those things where, like, if we can determine that this is the root cause of the problem, and there are practical ways to solve it, then it shouldn't exist, right? And so, I'm curious, because we've had some time to a little bit to marinate on these responses, but Jose, I'm just curious from your take, like, having knowing that one of the challenges here is the measurement of these things, right? How do you measure something that, like, the causal relationship between existing conditions and maybe the impact of that financially, or that the rework was cost to it? Sometimes it's very visceral. Like we've heard, someone's trying to insert a really precise structural steel framing or something, and it was all manufactured off site. They bring it on site, and guess what? It doesn't fit. But I'm curious if across your time at the various places you worked at, if you either of you have kind of seen some of these things pop up as well on this front.
Yeah. I mean, that's precise. And for those listening in, I'm sure any of my anecdotes are probably going to match your experience on the ground. But I couldn't tell you how many countless of times we've been approached, and almost without fail, you can kind of tell how grave the problem is going to be, depending on who hires us. A pattern that I've noticed, for example, is that a good sign is when a owner operator hires as built services. In our particular case, we do Scan-to-BIM, but of course there's other methods. That's typically a good sign because it suggests that kind of at the root there's an understanding as to why this verified information matters, not just to the owner but downstream to designers, engineers, builders. That's the ideal scenario, but I think that the reality is that I think most owner operators depend on their architects, engineers, and builders. And so once you start to kind of double click into these consultants, you start to hear a little bit more nuance of a take. They understand the importance of verifying conditions, but not everyone is rushing for that added liability. And also, as an architect, the last thing I want to be doing is spending my time, verifying site conditions. I want to be adding value, right? I want to design on the what should be. And so I think that there is a little bit of a kind of a passing of the baton, or like kicking the can down the road to the next person. The running joke that I have is that by the time it gets to construction managers owning us, there's typically already a problem. Someone already fabricated the steel and realized, holy smokes, did anyone bother to actually check if these background drawings were accurate to begin with? That's typically what happens by the time it gets to construction. Certainly not complaining because it's keeping us busy, but it does kind of reflect a pattern of the kind of the life cycle there. And of course, the further down the life cycle goes, the more expensive the problem becomes, because now you're dealing with stopping construction, typically dozens, perhaps hundreds of laborers, paused until this thing gets resolved. A lot of coordination, et cetera. So that's, of course, we can name off a bunch of projects, but that's typically kind of the pattern, we've seen.
Tyler, how about you?
Yeah, I mean dozens, tons. I mean, I'm just remembering. I was working on the Waldorf Astoria a number of years ago. That project is actually still under construction. I think they're finally going through like finishing subcontractor trades, but that building is so complicated and so confusing here in New York, because all of like the level datums are shifting all over the place. There's tremendous amounts of ornate details. There's staircases, that are going around, and like, I mean, beautiful project, just fantastic project. And we never, when I was at SOM, we never verified the existing conditions for this thing until it was too late, basically. And we ran into a lot of coordination issues, not just structural, right? But every trade in VDC. I mean, the number of false negatives and positives that we had in terms of our VDC coordination meetings, and well, like pre VDC, really, it was just overwhelming to the extent that it was like, okay, we we gotta do something. So like in that case, we should have gotten it done out of the way. I've got a slide about this kind of later that I'll touch on, but um, suffice it to say, on just the design team alone, we definitely blew the budgets and the margins a lot, just from the amount of just pure manpower that had to go into these coordination meetings. And finally we did end up getting some surveys and some specific areas that definitely helped. But yeah, it all could have been like really avoided on the front end, right? It's a small cost on the front end that I think downstream would have just made all stakeholders and all parties more efficient.
You know,
So
on that note, I think the next question is actually somewhat of a perfect tee up because um, this question is more about like the reasons why it doesn't happen, and there's probably, you know, we haven't like spliced it in some like super detailed way yet, but there might be some relationship between the previous question, those people that might have said that never happens or rarely happens, and likely maybe some other factors like size of a project, etc. Where like if you're a small firm, you might only focus on small renovations, and therefore, you know, spending whatever, there are different. I've heard so many different reasons why people even like to do it so, sort of without any technology. Everything from like typically very you know what is it, like almost like Louis Kahn, like if you ask a brick, this kind of like phenomenological, I want to be able to measure everything myself so that I really understand it, when the reality is that there's all these tools that exist that can actually help you do the same. But the following question was illuminating. So what are the primary reasons your organization chooses not to use Scan-to-BIM? And the summary here is that there are two main buckets of reasons. One has to do with the inability to articulate ROI, and the other one is the lack of client understanding. So when you're talking about that Waldorf project, sort of when hopefully firms have postmortems on like why did things not work out the way they intended the first time. But let's say you don't have that. I think it is reasonable to ask the question of like, well, why didn't we do it this way? And so if from what we're seeing here, at least from the early data, is that these two topics are really front and center for people. One, they just don't like, in the case of ROI, it's it's a lot of questions around the cost of things, right? But as we'll probably talk about later, there's this penny wise, pound foolish anecdote, or this kind of idea where, yeah, like you might save thousands up front, but actually it might cost you tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of any number of other kind of secondary or tertiary costs. So um, yeah, I mean, I think the client understanding part is really also very fascinating, right, Jose? I mean, you kind of brought this up, but like the best case scenario, it's the client that brings us, sort of the building owner is the one that brings us on board because they understand the value of it. And so, if we talked about, Tyler and I talked about this last, I think it was last webinar, about this kind of Venn diagram where on one hand, architects and the AEC side might understand that there's risks involved with not measuring it, but then the gap exists between that and owners not being able to see sort of like, how does this fit into my pro forma? Like I'm just putting another cost in here. So like, how do I reason about the actual impact of this on my overall cost? And so, yeah, I'm just curious to hear like from those owners that you have worked with, what is it about them? What's unique about them maybe that maybe is a good takeaway or something, a kind of pattern matching for folks listening in.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's a host of factors, and I know we're sometimes we can speak in kind of generalities. I know obviously not all owners are the same. There's small, medium, large organizations, and we're all kind of operating under different budgets and different timelines. Um, I think that there's patterns. I mean, when you're dealing with real estate, you're dealing with assets that are going to stand beyond the lifetime of all of us here. And so I think by definition, I hope that the best practitioners are thinking long term, but that's not often the case. In fact, my wife and I acquired a series of multifamily properties, and there's a difference between how I'd like to think we operate versus like the reality, right? And the reality is that like we've only got a certain amount of budget, right? So I think there's a difference between the nice, like how it should play out versus like the realities in it. But I do think it's a healthy dose of what's necessary. Um, I'm biased, so listeners take my 2 cents, and obviously I'm sure Tyler and George would agree. But I think Scan-to-BIM, what it does is it kind of expedites um, the time by which we can go from zero information to verified information relatively quickly, and at a level of detail that's often just hard to match with traditional PDFs or even CADs. I'm actually reading the comments here in the section. Adrian, Sharon, Something that's, I think, fairly common, where you have this building, and these buildings stand over time, and over time these buildings change, and over a series of years, perhaps a section is added, or a new area is added, and so now the floor plans, but before, may not represent the new additions, and then there's another addition, and so even if you documented that the next addition, you didn't capture the next one, and that's the reality of like how real estate is done. um I think there's a ton of things going on. I think number one, it's just really costly to document your building right now. Like, your best options are either to hire an architect, engineer, surveyor, and you really only have the budget like in certain times if you're an owner, right? Either you're acquiring the building, so you get a financing, you renovate the building, so you have a kind of construction loan. But outside of that, like, it's hard. I mean, operations and facilities teams are often working with a fraction of the budget that these other folks are working with. And so it's just really hard. So I think cost is a huge factor here. And I think technology obviously is making advancements. I'd like to think we're going to make a huge dent on this, in terms of the cost by which we can make it possible for George to walk into a building, scan something, press a button, get a level of accuracy of documentation that's good enough to acquire, verify floor areas, get documentation. But I have to admit, like, it's still a consideration. I mean, so I think that what we're seeing here checks out. Cost is a real thing.
Yeah, that point of Adrian's point about the the buildings are living things. They, there's and I think maybe there's sometimes these assumptions that are kind of made at the very beginning that, like, oh, because it looks sturdy, it must not, right? There's something sometimes about the materiality of a building. Oh, like from the outset, just a sense of security, a sense of like this thing is solid. But the reality is that there's sag, and there's the things age over time, and so we cannot take even yeah, some of the you just can't take the documentation, especially if you don't know, like, when was it scanned, like these kind of like the actual history of the scan itself, or the history of the kind of documentation. If you can't trust that history, then even less can you really understand whether the building what actual state that building might be in. And even best intentions, right? There's that tall building in New York that is forgot which one, the name of it, but the one that's like pretty uninhabitable, and it's like a huge skyscraper that's basically leaning. That's the reality. Like, the physics plays into the real world. um but yeah, Tyler, any reactions to this?
Yeah, I mean, I I couldn't agree more. One thing that I hear a lot is like, okay, I went through an example of like the Waldorf Astoria, which is an old building. There's tons of structural deformation. There's lots of shifting floor plates, a lot of stuff going on, many different renovations happening all over the place. And it's a very large, complicated project. So, in some sense, it's like the perfect candidate to do, upfront reality capture, verified conditions upfront. Um, but then, I'm actually just thinking about my own practice as we're kind of talking through these projects, because we're talking about very specific kind of renovation or acquisition projects with maybe very like legacy buildings. But it's not even that much. So I'm not sure how many are aware, but I have a design build firm, independent of IPX, and I recently just opened up a bar in Greenpoint. Gonna plug that. Million Goods. Everybody go check it out. It's a beautiful, beautiful listening bar. And so we opened it up just about a year ago. And in this case, I actually got to play the designer, the fabricator, construction, subcontractor coordination, as well as part of like the equity team and owner. And I know best. I mean, I work at a Scan-to-BIM company, and I first convinced the rest of the ownership team. Right, there's four other members, and so I first was able to convince them. Let's get a Matterport. Let's go in there. Let's build a BIM model, and let's go for it. then the idea was I was, after demolition, right? Because we got to file permits for demolition. And we're talking, this bar, by the way, is like 600 square feet, 700 square feet. It's tiny. And so I was able to convince everybody to do that on the front. And then we were going to do one after demolition, which honestly, from my perspective, is like the more important scan to capture in this case. And at that point, we were already in negotiations with the landlords and everybody else on the team, right? So like all of a sudden, our cash position became a lot less confident than when we started, and so I wasn't actually able to convince the rest of the team to do this Scan-to-BIM demolition, and because we didn't have the cash up front, or at least we didn't want to budget for it. On the long story short, on the back end, I prefabricated all of the custom millwork throughout the whole thing, and I brought it all onto site. And of course, it's we're like the last tray going in. We got to get it ready. We got to get it open to start generating some cash flow. And of course, I'm off by 6 inches, right? And I love my millwork to have really tight tolerances, and I'm off by 6 inches. So like on site, I just completely screwed myself, because on site now all of a sudden I got to like redesign everything, refabricate it on the spot, right? So I think there's a sort of misconception that you got to have like a crazy Waldorf Astoria with shifting foundations and all this stuff to get the value out of it. But I think honestly it plays a part in most projects. But
Yeah,
cash,
that yeah.
cash flow is tough.
And that resonates even at the level of like of just a residential project. So my wife, she's a licensed architect here in Florida. We're doing like um, a friend's renovation for a new house that they just bought, and we ended up doing the same thing. And we actually were able to scan, do the whole scan to BIM process, but the initial investment for them, the way that we structured it when we were talking about ROI, was really around almost this idea of measure twice, cut once. Like you just the way we started to just articulate it to them, which made it is you have to kind of walk them through it. So we're able to walk them through the idea of like, hey, you know, it's a lot. We need to do this either way because that house had like or has various levels, right? It drops even 6 inches into like this the sunken living room area, but also raises another 6 inches here and there. And so just even the small grade changes, all the kind of the it's not a box, and so the difference of where you have even like a sloping roof, etc., sloping ceiling, like that all had to be taken into account and measuring that by hand, right? At some point, you're just like, for every face, it's an exponential addition of time. And I think sometimes people don't kind of go into it thinking about that, that like the complexity of a space is actually, adds a huge amount of time when you're even just doing it by hand. So um, we were able to justify sort of the ROI for them in this like, hey, we're gonna find out a lot about this building up front, and you want to, and even if you have to use different analogies, like it's like going to the doctor to getting like your an exam, and it's like you get more information and then you at least know, but like that kind of translation is important. And there'll probably be other conversation we'll get to talk more in depth about that. But what we have here is the flip side of all this that we've also seen is not so much like, let's say you didn't do it at the very beginning and you never do it, right? Which is the kind of the previous question. What also might happen is that you didn't articulate the value up front. You didn't try to really explain what the potential consequences of not doing it, and then you end up hitting a wall later. And so we have something called we call this the regrettable conditions loop, where essentially what will happen is that someone doesn't educate a client, it's excluded as a critical line item. Then turns out the team realizes that they need to do it because it's just way more complicated than they thought it was going to be. And then they go back to the owner and they say, "Hey, we actually need to do this existing condition scan." So if you're the owner, what are you to take away from this, right? You're like, "Wait a minute, you said it was going to be this thing, and now it's this thing. So you didn't set expectations properly. And so what am I supposed to do? Well, like I don't want to do it. Like what's this extra cost?" And what we hear sometimes is that either that adds undue pressure, undue timelines, etc., or it's just avoided entirely. Where then the firm is left, or the project team is left with like, okay, well, maybe it's not that important. You're right, because they just want to they want to be nice and appeasing to the client, and they don't fight for it. And so what happens is that we'll get called on an emergency situation when it's like, holy shit, we really dropped the ball on this and we need to come in and do something, right? And we have to do it quick. And we've seen this time and time again, such that we gave it a name, right? And so these are the kind of things that we hope over time we kind of surface for everyone here, and help kind of clarify maybe a way to move forward. So with that, seeing there's some questions we'll get to maybe towards the end. Yeah, we have a couple more minutes. So
Yeah. Also, just want to acknowledge. Yeah, I'm seeing 7 new respondents. So really appreciate everyone providing
Awesome.
feedback. Again, super excited to share some of this. So before you hop off, or if we trust you guys if you guys got to hop back to work, but definitely reach out to myself, Tyler, George, just to kind of number one, we want you to get early access to the report. Also, claim your BIM discount. Obviously, we're biased. We want to work with you, but also, if you guys are doing big projects, I mean, 20% off a 50,000 square foot space is quite a bit. So we want to be there to support you guys. I think it's super cool. I'm seeing some of the kind of responses come in.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'll speed this up a little bit for the interest of time, but to get some of these questions. But the next question we asked was, what would be the best metric, the best ROI metric for projects, right? And so we just want to understand maybe a little bit more deeply. I think what's interesting about this question is that it's perceived from the perspective of the person answering it, right? So it's really not so much about what's the ROI for the client, but it's more so what the ROI is for the person involved. And you could see that kind of in the results, where the top answers had a lot to do with, like, one was very, very almost like in the weeds, in the sense of like improved model accuracy and decision making, right? That's on the workflow side of the AEC front, where the ROI is really predicated on, like, as part of the delivery process, how accurate is the deliverable itself, if it can be accurate. Now, you can imagine that is, we labeled this as a contextual confidence, right? You want to have confidence in the context of the project that you're in. But the reality of something like this is an ROI, which is also maybe, I'm curious to get your take on this, Jose and Tyler, about, it's like, it's an intangible metric in some sense. It's tangible insofar as, like, when you get it, but it's intangible before you get it, sort of, right? It's like, it's hard to say. It's not like a 20% reduction in time or 30% reduction and etc. It's more about the actual experience of using the thing, and then ultimately maybe the lagging indicator, which is when a project is completed, right? Was there anything that got messed up at the very end? And so it's very interesting to get this one kind of teased out of people, that they saw this as a benefit. But I'm curious, Jose, like, how have you seen this play out before?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. I think it really depends on kind of what side of the table you're sitting on, right? So there's kind of different roles that even I've played in my career, right? First as a designer, or as a builder, or in certain cases as the owner, having to budget to make these things happen. And so I think at as a designer, I'm often approaching, like, what I want to make sure is I'm delivering a quality product that is accurate and that is buildable. Time obviously is important in the sense of, like, if I can start a project with verified set of background drawings, then I can skip through the 30 or 40% of time just asking people for documents and photos and trying to somehow recreate this to even start my design. So to have, to save time is huge for me there. There is this weird incentive, though, I have to acknowledge. Like, I think particularly in the design industry, where because we bill by hours, it's kind of weird because, like, well, I certainly bill for that. It's maybe not the value that as an architect I'm bringing, but anyway, that's a different webinar for a different time. George, I know you got some perspective on that one. But as the owner, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to time, cost, speed, security, and a combination of these things coming together. Um, I think at the owner's level, it's just I often actually want to delegate certain headaches. So I think it's interesting, Tyler. In your case, you were operating as everything, right? The owner, the designer, the builder. Um, but I'm curious. Like in your case, you decided to do this survey. Well, I guess no, it makes sense because you're also the builder. I was gonna say, like, why didn't you like ask your architect or your construction manager? But you were
I was them.
you were.
I'm the ultimate person to blame for this. And I work at a Scan-to-BIM company.
Yeah.
It's completely ridiculous because as an owner, I'm wearing the hat of the cash flow, right? And so we did scan it first, but we didn't scan it after construction. And this is one of these these like 1930s buildings that is the Brooklyn special in terms of detailing. Let's put it that way. And so what we discovered when we opened up the walls was like, this like 6-inch discrepancy that, I've been working in BIM management and, teaching Revit classes for years. And I thought that I had it, pretty locked in tight, and I still messed up.
Even the best of what is it like?
Happens to the best of us.
Happens to the best of us.
Yeah, my dad's a cosmetologist, or he cuts hair for a living. He's bald, so it's just how it goes.
Well, I think that brings us, the keyword cash flow brings us to maybe the next question. I love how, Tyler, you kind of tee it up for us about the money bags here. So what's the most significant risk you associate with starting a construction project without verifying existing conditions? Surprise, surprise. A lot of the answers came down to some financial issue. So when you add up all the financial focused responses, like budget overruns, increased RFIs and change orders, surprise structural MEP conflicts, it kind of all adds up to very expensive consequences. And now, sort of the challenge of this that is still comes down to, like, how do you communicate this? Or maybe some questions that I think that we want to push on, maybe moving for the in subsequent webinars like this, is just more like, how do we go about educating clients about the negative impacts of not doing this? Because I'm sure that's the 6 inches. I mean, maybe you ate the cost of reworking it, Tyler, on that project, or maybe the 6 inches was okay enough that you just left it in, but it wasn't the ideal outcome that you were hoping for. But we need to surface more of these things, right? We need to figure out ways to communicate this more clearly for everybody, and it's just critical, because otherwise, I think, sure, there's the intangible aspect of what we're talking about, but there's also the pro forma. And maybe the last point that I'll have you react to is, like, we talked about this a little bit internally about how sometimes, as a designer, again, we have the benefit of having these other experiences where, either on the owner's side at WeWork, you kind of when I was at WeWork, it was very interesting to see, and my wife was basically a global head of architecture by the time she left, that how these scans were being used as a financial device. So what do I mean by that? I mean that when we scanned a location, we negotiated leases using the point cloud. We negotiated leases using the point cloud. That was because you had a verticalized company that had not just a finance team, not like everyone that was kind of involved with the pro forma of a building. Now you can argue like certain other things about, like, whatever, right? But more so, like, at the tactical use case of, like, using these scans to negotiate better TI credit, because you can then say, hey, this floor is unlevel. It's going to cost X amount per square foot to bring it up. We don't take the floor with us when we leave, right? We improved it for you. You should be able to pay, whether that's in less rent up, that we have to pay, or whatever, right? But how do we become better consultants of maybe not just the consequences, the financial consequences, but also the proactive benefit. And so one thing that I'm very curious to hear more from, like, everyone that's listening to this, and maybe we can figure out ways to um, wrap our heads around it as well. But it's like, how do we become better advisors to the people that we're working with? And maybe this sounds risky, but how do we get to understand how they financially work, right? Their financial incentives, their financial goals, and then reframe what we're doing in light of that, as opposed to like only seeing the work that we do as a cost center. Like, how is our work actually a financial benefit? And so, yeah, curious to get your reactions to that.
Yeah, yeah. And a few things. I'm reading some of the responses on the last question of the survey, which, by the way, incredible feedback. I'm just kind of reading out loud here some of the things we're seeing. Tracy mentions we did not mandate the as-built information that was derived from a scan. So the model was actually created from the existing conditions, was wrong from day one. So this actually surfaces up something that I've seen quite a bit, which is um, things kind of don't exist in isolation. A BIM model in and of itself is not kind of the saving grace. And this is something that I've found, particularly in non-technical circles, they might conflate like BIM with like, okay, I checked the BIM box, for example, thus it should be correct. I think an important point here, and really what's changed in the last few years, is this understanding that actually by pairing right reality capture, accurate best practices, combined with best modeling practices, you could really start to create kind of a workflow that starts to verify and then produce the accurate content necessary for an owner to verify floor areas, designers to use as background drawings, et cetera. So I think Tracy's point here is important, which is I assume the project maybe had a BIM, but no one kind of cared to ask like, how was that BIM created in the first place? And it just highlights kind of like, again, we shouldn't expect the average landlord to know this stuff. So it's on us to really help kind of communicate this one. Let me see. I'm also seeing a few points here. Oh yeah, I think, and George, this kind of brings up your point here.
Yeah. Yeah. This is more to say, we brought this up in the last presentation we did, but um, it's like, like there's the argument of the revenue side. Like, how do we help people understand the financial benefit potential from that versus like maybe the financial risk? And one way we're framing it a lot internally is just like, how do we think about this as an insurance premium that you're paying? So you're paying uh, a couple thousands, et cetera, to do the scan of a project. And if you place that more as an insurance premium, that will, that's what they do, right? It's to offset sort of the negative consequences, right? And so, Tyler, I know that you kind of came up with this slide, so maybe you want to talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I'm sure that everybody in the chat is pretty familiar with this diagram. And if not, then I can kind of go through it a little bit. And I really co-opted this from the whole BIM management world, really. So this is called the McLeany curve that was given to us from HOK, and the entire industry has really just been leaning against this thing for the last like 20 years. But what it does is it really measures the ability to make impact onto a project across time with two different variables, sloping outcomes. So when you're in, conceptual design, the ability to just change a project or change a decision, change the scope of a project, change the structural system, whatever it might be, has the least amount of cost in terms of design changes or construction, right? And as you go through schematic design, design development, construction documents, so on and so forth into construction, you don't really want to be changing your I had a project working at Hudson Yards that, if anybody, I know a lot of us in New York have worked on these projects, and you'll remember, I forget which tower it was, but there was one tower where we were almost done with construction documents, and we decided to change the structural system from concrete to steel. Um, well, the decision was sort of made for us, I guess. There's a lot of politics going on there, but um, that set the entire team back, and it was very costly, right? Because all of these decisions, all these details, everything, right? So I kind of say that as a as just sort of like a metaphor, right? This is not just BIM. This, to me, is, incorporating the scan to BIM process late is still going to be, costly, right? Because you've already had all this kind of investment. So the idea about this, right, is to really frame the conversation early about getting verified conditions, and kind of when you're thinking about it, I mean, this is how I should have pitched it to myself when when I was doing my bar, is you got to think about it as like an insurance premium, right? No one likes to pay for insurance, but if you don't pay for insurance, I mean, what's going to happen? So yeah, that's really kind of um, the underlying kind of message here. And what I'm really interested in about, I think this is a good segue to the next slide here, is, by us gathering these industry surveys and metrics, what we are actually seeing already, which is kind of surprising, is like on the director level, we're getting different types of responses, or different perceptions of what the return on investment is, what the value is, what the risks are, things like that, than someone who's in, like a technical manager, more of a VDC coordinator or BIM manager. And these sort of segmentations of this industry data, I think, is going to be really interesting, as it highlights, right, this sort of mind-numbing question of like return on investment, because it's there's a lot of ways to basically frame that equation. So we're really interested in kind of gathering feedback and providing some kind of analysis on this to really inform more assets that we can give out to the industry. So I think, I don't know if it was last webinar or two webinars ago, but me and George did a sprint to build a couple return on investment tools, as well as, we literally have a return on investment calculator inside of our platform at this point for, deciding whether doing a scan in house makes sense, versus outsourcing it, that sort of thing. But there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different parties, depending upon which side of the table that you're sitting on, as far as, what kind of message or narrative about that return on investment. So that's something that I'm super interested, is like being able to sub segment this across different industry, across different personas, maybe even across different geographies, right? So Jose, I mean, I feel like in this scan to BIM space, right? I mean, you've got the most experience out of all of us here. Can you share maybe some of the feedback, or maybe other, you know, uh, other examples from a time that as-built inaccuracy caused a problem, or another project delay? Maybe a different use case.
Yeah, tons. But I will say, certain lessons learned that I could pull from. I think at this point we've done over 5,000 different projects, and they've either come directly through owner operators, designers, builders, or in certain cases, our partnerships with companies like Matterport and Navis, et cetera. But I think some of the underlying like threads in terms of use cases is, if you imagine the kind of the building life cycle existing kind of within a recurring cycle, right? You acquire a building, you renovate the building, you lease and operate the building, and you hold it or you sell it. And if you imagine this kind of cycle, what we've learned is that everyone around the table on all sides of the cycle, whether you're leading operations or leasing, you need certain data of that building, and you need it in a variety of different formats, right? You might need numbers if you're an estimator. You might need images if you're a leasing person. You might need floor plans if you're the designer. You might need all of it if you're the real estate team, and to kind of connect everybody with. But what I find is that there's a difference between who needs the data, which is typically everyone around the table, versus where the budgets are to kind of insert digitization services. And the reason goes back to what George is highlighting before, which is cost is still a real thing. I mean, there's still certain costs associated with going into document building. I think as companies like ours invest in technology to get faster, better, more standardized, our hope is that that bar starts to kind of lower and lower and lower, so that the cost of documenting your building um, just becomes less. I mean, someone used the doctor's analogy. Imagine going to the doctor's appointment and you literally could not afford to get an X-ray. Well, it's kind of important to get an X-ray because you could at least start to see like what might be going on inside your building. And in a similar way, I see it the same way. Imagine if more people could afford an X-ray to then start to better understand what is actually going on. My bet, I don't think I'm, you know, the stretching here, is that we're just going to have better insights into what's happening, so we can be a lot more proactive. Um, my hope, I'm biased, is that we start to kind of lower the cost, really start to kind of increase the standardization quality of these pictures, and we could be a lot more proactive. Hopefully, so that when you acquire and you renovate, also, regardless of the cycle, you could start to kind of document your building, so we could just be a lot more proactive. But with that, I do know we're approaching time here, so I don't know if we, George, if we want to rein this baby in.
Yeah. Try to say. I just want to highlight. Francois commented about how they use the Pastor framework. I just quickly looked that up, and it's kind of like both the copywriting, but also probably maybe more of a the kind of sales frameworks, copywriting frameworks, etc., that help to elucidate what the problem is for Amplify, basically highlight the consequence of that, solution it, provide the solution, and then in short, like, these type of frameworks are actually very, very helpful, and it might be really great to maybe bring on Francois to one of these conversations to learn more about it, but and how they're using it. But yeah, like setting up these kind of processes, frameworks by which you can walk someone through, right? And the benefit of this is like learning how to explain the cost benefit of something like this can ripple, right? If you don't already do something like this across all your services, then even just doing this on existing conditions will basically it's like a skill that you can then apply everywhere else in your business, because what we're talking about here is really applicable in design services in general, or construction services. It's kind of all part and parcel about helping to be a better advisor, a better consultant to your client, such that you build what I think everybody wants here, which is retention, right? Everybody wants to have customers come back and repeat because they love the work that they're doing. So to start to rein this in a little bit, we'll try to answer any open questions that have been asked here. Tyler's already doing that. Please, we have an audacious goal here of getting 300 respondents. So continue to answer this really short, no more than 5 minutes, I promise, questionnaire that will help everyone, right? We hope to share this results to everyone here. Tyler's already placing that you'll get a discount up to 20% off for BIM it. For those, we might not at the top, I don't think we explained BIM it, but essentially BIM it is we take a point cloud that you have and we turn it into a 3D model, CAD plans, IFC, and we deliver that in a beautiful platform, which you can find on our website, integrated-projects.com. Let's see here, the last thing, and then a couple follow-up notes for everybody. Oh, we'll skip all these here, actually. Supposed to get hidden, but we'll see. Okay, so if you have any questions, please meet with us. These two fine gentlemen here. You can jump on a call with them, talk about challenges that you're facing. Again, we want to help. It's a real, right? So if you're facing any kind of challenge in communicating the benefit of Scan-to-BIM to your own clients, please reach out, set up a conversation. We can certainly help you frame that conversation. Earlier the better, right? We want to avoid getting stuck in the regrettable loop. You don't want that. Your clients don't want that. So try to avoid it, right? My mom always said that a horse is the only animal that steps in the same hole twice. I think that what that means is that you want to avoid issues when you're told. She also has a bunch of other ones that maybe I'll share in future conversations. But the very last thing is the next webinar is going to be really cool. We're going to have someone else on our team talk about some really interesting reporting updates that we are super excited about. Jose kind of hints a little bit in what he's saying about how we want to be really, really good at delivering more value cost effectively, and reporting is a very interesting part of our product roadmap. We're going to give you some more clarity on. Essentially, yeah, like how can we basically provide answer a lot of questions up front. You heard me talk about things like floor leveling, etc. Like how can we start to extract more information earlier from the assets that we're getting on site, such that you and your teams can actually hit the ground running faster. Because yeah, it's important. So thanks everyone. Thank you for your time. We just barely made it over a lot of time here, but if yeah, feel free to reach out to us. Super pumped with all your feedback, and thanks again. See you next time.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.